Good evening, everyone. Thank you for dialing in. Before I start, I would like to thank NPTEL and team for organizing this session and inviting me to talk on a subject which is pretty close to my heart. Most importantly, during this unprecedented time, I think it provides a platform and an ability to connect with each other and exchange ideas. So, all credit due to NPTEL. Now, before I start, I'll just do a brief introduction about myself and then we can go into the topic in detail. My name is Santhosh Mahendiran. I've got close to 20 years of experience in the field of IT. Primarily started as an analyst programmer, and I've been very fortunate to work with some fantastically talented colleagues who have helped me to be who I am today. I spent a lot of my formative years with Citibank, and now for the past 10 years with Standard Chartered. I'm extremely passionate about technology in general and the positive impact that it can create. And more importantly, my areas of interest are data analytics, obviously, and then robotics and digitization in general. I'm also extremely passionate about cooking, but I'm not sure if NPTEL would appreciate me using their platform to demonstrate my culinary skills. So I'm not going to talk about that today. And on that foodie note, let's get into the presentation. Okay, so what have we got here? Talks about data analytics and AI being hottest. And I've kind of structured this presentation into three parts. The first part, I've tried to give a little bit of background on what is the fundamental shift on why data is becoming so sought after, and what's the transformation that's happening in this space, right? And why are people suddenly waking up and looking at data with new eyes? So that's data point number one. So that'll be part one. Part two, I'll talk about some use cases because obviously, is it all hype or are people and institutions actually harnessing this data? And in my part three, I will talk about some of the challenges, practical challenges, and this is purely from a practitioner standpoint. I'll talk about some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis and some of my thoughts on how the future of this industry is going to be and where it is heading to. So these are my three sections, and these are the three parts that I'm going to talk about today. So before I start, I'll a little bit brief about Standard Chartered Bank. Standard Chartered is a very old institution, and it's been around for more than 160 years. We are present in close to 60 markets, and we are listed on two of the stock exchanges in Asia, apart from being listed in London. So we are in Mumbai and Hong Kong. A great bank with a fantastic pedigree. So, like I told you, my first part is going to talk about the foundations and why this data transformation is happening. Before that, I thought I'll start with a little bit of history. So for the last 50 years, I think data has always been entrusted only to a select few executives. And even for those who have access, trying to make sense of it took months and if not years. For others, and obviously this has to do with the fact that data has been looked at as something that's important, but not something that can be made sense of. And I'll give you a couple of examples, right? So I think you should all be familiar with teams called MIS. So, and obviously you know what it stands for: Management Information Systems. Why can't it be EIS? Everyone's information system, right? So the whole connotation of data being accessible and usable only by a select few has been set from time from from ages beyond, right? So that's a particularly that's something that you should be aware of. The second, we used to have all these manufacturing companies used to have something called EDP, which is called an electronic data processing department. So it was just about processing data. So nobody looked at it truly as an asset. So the history of data, it's not that it's something new, it has always existed, but it had been entrusted to a few people and only few of them could make sense of it. So similar with the concept of AI, right? So AI as a concept was first mooted in 1950 and by the brilliant mathematician Professor Alan Turing, after whom the Turing Prize is named after, right? So he had this fantastic notion of saying, and he used the concept of something called imitation game. If a computer is able to imitate the sentient behavior of a human being, thus the computer becomes sentient on its own. It's a pretty simple statement, but that probably sowed the genesis for modern AI. And we still have the Turing Award, and then there's a Turing test, which is named in his honor, which is still used today to ascertain the level of AI. Then in 1955, yet another brilliant scientist, Professor John McCarthy, actually coined the word AI. So he had this great idea to organize a conference and call all the super intelligent folks around, and I think he called them 10 to 11, probably 4 to 5 of them made it. But that was the conference and the theme of the conference was called artificial intelligence. So why I'm giving you this data is to tell you that it's just not data analytics, AI. All these have existed for quite some time. So it's not something new that people need to be aware of. And yeah, so we'll see in the subsequent slides, why have they become buzzwords and what has transformed the data landscape. So this slide is pretty important. So if I may urge you to kind of pay close attention to it, and this kind of explains the drivers for the transformation. The first driver is digitization and data explosion. So since 2000, or since I would say when the internet actually became mainstream, the explosion of data has been manifold. What has happened is social media obviously has added to this. But on top of that, right, we've got IoT sensors, we've got mobile data, we've got log data, and you name it. You have every form of data that's available everywhere to be accessed. Obviously, you all know that data is growing at double digit, and I wouldn't be surprised if it even goes to 3 digits. So that's the pace at which data is growing. What's important to realize is it's just not the same set of data, but the vagaries of data are also entirely changing. So meaning to say, so earlier you just had data in the form of rows and columns, but now you're kind of seeing data in multiple forms, shapes, and sizes. The second driver for the transformation is the advent of cloud, and this is something that I think is playing a major upheaval today. Just not for data, but for the whole IT industry as a whole. But specifically for data, I think this really has kind of pushed the needle. And let me give you a simple example. 90% of projects pertaining to data or even any other projects the biggest complexity in most of these projects is pertaining to setup of infrastructure. So cloud takes away the biggest piece of the puzzle and simplifies it, right? So in simple layman terms, cloud has accelerated the adoption of new technologies and the ability to bootstrap faster. The second part about cloud that makes it so relevant to data is the elasticity. And what does elasticity mean? So in simple terms, right, the ability to scale up and scale down resources. So historically, if I had to run mathematical models or computational models, I needed to actually take the data, a subset of the data, and then I would run an algorithm or I would run a model on a subset of the data, because obviously the size of data would be too huge. and then I would retrofit it into production with a bigger set, hoping that my output from my test data somehow correlates to the larger data that I have and that I'm going to deploy in production. Never before did I have the capacity to say that, hey, for testing purposes, can I bootstrap, say, 10 petabytes of storage? Can I test my model in whole? And can I test out all scenarios? So cloud has really enabled it. And the other good part about cloud, obviously, is the whole need for you to pay upfront and then work out the depreciation of your asset, then work out, is this going to be on my books for how long? Then do I need to keep it for 3 years or 5 years and all that? So basically, it's just a pay-per-use model. So cloud is really a game changer. The third transformation is new technology. So I spoke a little bit about explosion of new data, right? Social media and all that. And you would all be definitely aware that a lot of these new technologies were first started at the companies where there were challenges with data. So for example, Kafka was started at LinkedIn. Hadoop was started at Yahoo. And why did they have these issues? Because they were just not able to store data in relational databases. So you had to find solutions to find new technologies to store data differently and Kafka to harness data differently. Similarly with Apache NiFi, right? So Apache NiFi was a project in the NSA, and that was something that was started, and now it's obviously open sourced, and then Apache as an ecosystem has taken over. But just to let you know that the need to harness data, the new vagaries of data have also pushed technologists to create new technologies to harness the same. And open source, and it's just not about making software free for use. Open source has become a mantra and a way of life for the newer generation, which is extremely heartening to see. So it's just not about saying that I've given a good piece of software, but it's also the need to upkeep it and how can I get the whole ecosystem involved behind it. So that's something that's really pushing this transformation. The last but not the least, and probably one more driver for this transformation, is people have at last woken up and smelled the coffee to say that data really means business. The days of yore when I spoke about MIS, EDP department, the whole idea was let's take a dump of the data and store it somewhere so that if someone asks for the data at some point of time, let me just retrieve it and pass that information. So data and analytics are just no longer in the IT domain. So data, if you ask me, data is very niche, and it's just not me, and all the practitioners would say that data is something that you don't associate with IT, and you don't obviously need to associate with business, but there is more business than IT in data. So examples like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, the big data companies, Google, all these have thrived. And if you look at almost all the biggest technology companies, they have a backbone of data as the biggest infrastructure. You would all notice a small one at the bottom of my presentation for this slide. That was more for my reference than for you, but I'm happy to also share why I put it in there. There's a lot of topics that I'm going to talk about during the course of this presentation. But if I urge you to just take away 3 things, right? There'll be 3 things that I'll urge you to take away. So one of them is this. What are the drivers for this transformation? Because that's something that is pretty simple to know. The explosion of data, the digitization, cloud, new technologies, and the fact that data can actually mean business. So anyone should be able to answer this question. Right. We spoke about cloud, right? And is it truly having a measurable impact on business? I don't think there's any doubt on that. But cloud shouldn't be purely looked as a cost play, meaning to say that if you just use cloud as a driver to say that I'm going to reduce my cost, that's a wrong notion of looking at the cloud ecosystem. The reality is the cloud, yes, it does help you save running costs. There's no doubt on that. There is definitive improvement in a lot of parameters which need to be improved, and there's definite reduction in parameters that definitely need a little bit of a whack, like operational costs, etc. But What is also important is, which we'll talk about in the later part of the presentation, is while cloud is having a positive impact, there are industries that lag behind a little bit in adoption. One of them being financial industry, which I'm part of. And primarily the reason being regulations. So government, regulators, and other people need to come together to drive the adoption. But the whole idea is there's just no two ways about cloud not having an impact. Absolutely having a positive impact, and it does really improve the scale of business. Good. Then let's talk about how digitization changes data, right? So we spoke about the transformation. One of the first examples that I said drivers for transformation was how digitization. So Jeff Immel, the former GE CEO, said the one flight, obviously, I mean, you'll be able to read this, but it produces a humongous amount of data just between New York and Chicago. And I was speaking to a very close friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Dr. Sebastian Wedniewski, who joined us from Daimler, and he told me driverless cars produce close to 4.5 petabytes of data in an hour. So that's a humongous amount of data. When you think about it, right? That's just and you need someone sitting at the other end of the spectrum to make sense of it. It's good to look at these numbers and say, yeah, so what? But you need someone to make sense of it. And it's just not about the data it produces. How can I use it to do preventive maintenance? Are the sensors working properly? Are the blades working properly? Is there an orientation mismatch between what the sensor does with the actual flight trajectory? So tons of information. Right. So I kind of like this example because for me, simple examples kind of resonate well with me, right? So I used to have this Apple vendor who used to, when I was studying in school, used to pass by selling apples, and he used to have this scale where he used to measure and then used to weigh, and I think it's still very much in vogue. Electronic scales, are much more precise. Some of them have started adopting it. It gives you to the decimal the precise weight. Digital has taken it a notch higher. So most of the fruits nowadays have a small sticker stuck on them with a small barcode. So once you scan that, it gives you the entire biodata of the apple and beyond. So it tells you where it was manufactured, which farm was it produced, how many calories is it, whatever you needed to know about the apple and more. So this is a very good example to tell you how digital changes the whole paradigm about in using a simple apple, right? On data. Digital changes the paradigm of data. This is yet another good example that I always like to share with my friends and my students and a lot of them around. So when Henry Ford, so let me demystify. The one you see on the top is a Ford, classic Ford, T Ford. The one you see in bottom is the super duper Tesla Model 3S. So if you look at it, nothing much changes in terms of what the car could do. Takes you from point A to point B, and very much serves the same purpose even now. But that's where the similarities end. So beyond that, what has started happening? So Ford car was, as you all know, a mechanical device with probably a spark plug to start the whole engine. The Tesla, I would call, is a software device. And why would I call that? And for those who have driven a Tesla would appreciate a no. And it's probably got more software than most of the systems out there. And what does it do? It continuously feeds information back to the head office or to the service center. And what are the advantages? You don't need to do an upgrade. You don't need to go to the Tesla garage to do an upgrade. You can do remote upgrades. Tesla has also got this fantastic dog mode where you can actually cool the car remotely if a dog is sitting inside, right? So so you can do upgrades. And of course, if you thought all was hunky-dory, I have this fantastic story on what Tesla did when a person bought a car which was sold as second-hand. So Tesla realized that the original owner didn't pay for some features and disabled them remotely. So there are pros and cons to technology, but what's for sure is technology has definitely changed the way we look at things and we use products. Right. As an example of the flight, as an example of the car, etc. What's happening in simple terms, right? Data is streamed real time. So you have streaming data, and it's real time, right? And it's not end of day. It's not happening after 30 minutes. There's no latency. So it's streamed real time, event-driven architecture, and then there are sensors that transmit it to a receiving person or an ecosystem that analyzes it and then responds. And what is important is to collect every piece of data, and I emphasize on that, every piece, because as a practitioner and as a purist, right, I believe there's no bad data. So tomorrow when I talk around, when I talk on the career options, you will see that there is a little bit of bad data, but that's in the context of usability. But primarily, no data is bad. Every piece of information is valuable, and that's very, very important, right? Because it's just not the streaming data that you need from the car. You also need things that probably tells you why the car is not sending data. Why did that blip occur for that particular period of time? Right. So I'll probably this is just not a saying, but this is something that I live by, and I don't take credit for the statement. More data trumps smarter algorithm. So this statement was well made prior to Trump being a good word. So meaning to say it was still not a bad word. Sorry, I mean it was still good to be used. So more data trumps smarter algorithm. So it was actually coined by this fantastic researcher called Gabriel Recchia, and he's a Google scholar, and now I think he is with Cambridge as a research scientist. But this was part of his PhD thesis at the University of Indiana, Bloomington, and it dealt with lexical semantics. So I'm not going to go into what his thesis was, because I myself didn't understand a large part of it. So we'll keep that for a separate discussion. But what it does to the data world is something that I understand closely, and which I think companies like Google, Facebook, and others are actually driving their business on. Let me explain it in simple terms. Assume that you had 70 to 80% accurate algorithm, and you had 100% data, right? So that's one data set for you. On the other hand, you had an algorithm that was 100% accurate, and I gave you only 80% of data. Human instinct tells us that you go for the 100% accurate algorithm, right? So if some of you out there sat there thinking, no, it should be the one with the data, credit to you, you're right. The reality is the vagaries of data far outweigh the accuracy of the algorithm. So meaning to say, if you had an algorithm that was not perfect and will never be given the vagaries of data, you should always go for an option where you're able to test it on as much as data as possible. So very simple concept, very powerful concept, and goes back to that whole streaming mechanism, and goes back to my earlier statement that there is no bad data. You just need to collect as much as data as possible. Of course, there will be people out there asking, hey, can we harness all this data? Can we literally use it? Are you speaking for real? And probably you guys out there and girls thinking out there are right. It's probably not possible to harness entire data. You could harness a subset of it, but the whole key idea is you should never lose any data. You should get all the data, and you should be able to use it whenever you need it to. So this is my second takeaway for you. A simple takeaway, but a very powerful takeaway in the world. So if those who are interested can go and read this, look up this statement and then read about it, but a very powerful statement. This changed my whole perception. As a practitioner, this statement changed the way I think and the way I use data. Right. So that brings us to an end of our first part, right, where we spoke about a quick recap, where we spoke about what's the history of data, what are the parameters, how it's actually changing, what's driving this transformation, and a little bit about streaming and real-time data, which is an absolute necessity. This section, I'm going to talk about the use cases. I'll try to talk about as many use cases as I can. I'll try to cover as many industries as possible. I'll start off with probably my something that I'm pretty what do I say? I kind of like this guy in a good way and a bad way. So as I was sitting and preparing this presentation and going through what I wanted to put, I wanted to choose some examples that was pretty relevant and contextual so that I can share with you. And Mr. Zuckerberg put out a fantastic one, and I really thank him for it. So I'm not going to read out the whole statement, but I have highlighted two sections. So the first one in the red, basically. So what he says is Facebook is uniquely suited to run surveys because we serve a global community of billions of people and can do statistically accurate sampling. So first and foremost, I think Facebook, you all are aware, there are more people in the world who have Facebook accounts than bank accounts. So that's why I like this guy. So he's been able to sell a product that everyone bought without knowing that they are probably giving him their most valuable asset. The second one that basically says is you as humans, we have a tendency to talk to computers and share our insights with static with inert forces rather than actually talk to humans. So we share more information with Facebook and other mediums. So and in a way he's right? So Facebook is uniquely positioned. So I give it to him that way. So I don't know if you all tried it, but I did log in to try. There is, every time you scroll down or you log into Facebook, there is a survey link at the top and you can give that information. Of course, not all collected information would be true because some of them could kind of spike it, or you could kind of give a different set of information. But the reality is, it goes back to my earlier point, 1 billion data points would far outweigh the irregularities. The second part in green, Mr. Zuckerberg has put in thanks to his tryst with law. So the earlier avatar of Mr. Zuckerberg would not have done it, which says we do it in a privacy protective way, where only the researchers at Carnegie Mellon see individual survey responses on Facebook only. So this is to tell you that as much as you might have the world's most powerful database and which has information of all the human beings, you also need to be governed. So I don't know if you're aware, Facebook also monitors what you do outside of Facebook. So if you have an app installed, and this was a pretty big grouse, and only recently I think they've kind of made it simpler for people to go and actually disable that option, where you can actually go and switch off this whole preferences. Yeah, so credit to Zuckerberg, but a very simple example of using data to provide COVID maps. So yeah, so he's really hit the ball out of the park as far as data is concerned. So let's move to an area that I'm pretty conversant with, a banking use case, and we'll talk about, let's see how much time. Yeah, so we have some time. So while we go through this, I thought I'll kind of share one more example which is very interesting, which is not here, but which is very interesting, and it's a very humorous tale. And how data, and like I said, Facebook knows more about you than you know about yourself. And long before Facebook, there was simple analytics which also proved that statement. So you all know there's this Target store in US, right? So there's this gentleman, and this happened I think in 2012 or 2013. So this is not something new. So the incident that I'm sharing with you is a fantastic anecdote, but happened in 2012, 2013. So there was this gentleman, a new data scientist called Andrew Pohl, who joined Target, and being the smart bloke that he was, he wanted to see how do we kind of get customers kind of glued on to Target. And one of the thought processes he had is, so if he kind of caught young mothers, basically people who are just young parents, basically, who are recent mothers, who just deliver. If you could get their buy-in, or if you could get them as clients, you would have them as clients for the rest of your life, right? So obviously, being a parent, you tend to spend more, you don't see the purse strings, and you splurge on a lot of things. So what he did was, he collected a lot of data over a period of time. And then he started then grouping the data, and then found some interesting dimensions. So the first thing he found out was, into their second trimester, pregnant women started buying unscented body lotions. Then towards their third or fourth trimester, they had zinc or calcium tablets. And then he found out as soon as they were going to deliver, they would buy huge bags of cotton balls, and they would buy unscented body lotions, and they would buy kids diapers. So that was a giveaway. So using all this information, Mr. Andrew Paul built something called as a pregnancy indicator score, right? So he built that. So it's a simple statistical model. Anyone can do that. You have 25 variables, you assign a score, and then it's pretty easy to do that. But yeah, it requires a little bit of thinking. And then he found out, he then assigned it. So what did he do? He didn't stop there. And then he started sending out mailers or coupons right at the time of delivery. So eerily, Target could predict when a woman was going to deliver. So they just did not predict their pregnancy. They could also give the target date due for delivery based on purchases. And how was this primarily done? Because you'd be thinking, how did Target get this information? You would have loyalty cards, right? So as you log in, and now you have tons of loyalty cards. Target also had its Target loyalty card, and every customer during every purchase would give that loyalty card. And that's where this information was caught, and that's where it was used to model. So yeah, you obviously need a source. So right, so he had this information, he caught it, he modeled it, did it. But the joke is not that. The joke is that, so he sent out these coupons. So one day, this high school, there's this father in Minneapolis who comes to a Target store. This is a real story, guys. And then he looks at the manager and says, hey, I got this mailer for my young daughter who's in high school on pregnancy-related stuff. And she's in high school. What do you think Target is doing? And the manager was taken aback. He apologized. He said, sorry, sir, this must have been some mistake. And the father then threw the mailers on top of him and then stomped away angrily. So then, Target being Target, called up the father after some time, after a couple of weeks, and apologized and said, sir, we are sorry about it. And this time, the roles were reversed. So the father was pretty apologetic. And then he said, hey, you know what? Actually, you guys are right. There's some things that are happening in the house that I wasn't aware of. And God bless that man. But yeah, so he wasn't aware of. But yeah, my daughter was indeed. But can you tell me how it did happen? So the whole idea is sometimes this is the thin line between being intrusive and actually having a good recommendation, right? So why I shared this example is data can be truly powerful if used in the right way. And it's also a thin line where you can actually cross the border. So yeah, so it's a fantastic example. I didn't put this up. I've kind of read it in 2013 when I thought about the Zuckerberg example. So I thought I'll just bring it up. Nice. Good. So let's talk about the banking use case. So this is an area that I'm pretty conversant, but doesn't make me the more knowledgeable. But yeah, banks are definitely one of the pioneering and are really trying to put data at the forefront of the business that we do. So name screening is pretty. The concept is pretty simple, but the whole task is pretty painful, right? So what do? So there are tons of lists, terrorist list, there's a PEP, which is a politically exposed persons list, adverse media list, sanctions list, there are tons of lists. So a name screening analyst needs to take the incoming client, look through all these lists, and then run him through a series of models, which basically are there, and then check, is he part of this list? They do some fuzzy matching with this, and then come up with saying that we've gone through these lists, and then come up with a score and a list and an annotation. Come up with some annotation. What's the challenge? You might ask me, what's the big deal? Why can't you just take a customer, look him through lists, run a score? And the challenge is volume, right? So you can do it for one, you can do it for two. Imagine you have millions of clients and millions of prospects. These are not even your clients. Even before they become your client, you want to run these kind of algorithms. And you have to do repeated and multiple times. And the painful part, like I told you, is this information gathering is across multiple sources. And obviously, humans are prone to errors. We're not machines. I hope that era still hasn't come. But yeah, so there is need for consistency, quality, and obviously there is a limit to which you can work. So even if you run 3 shifts, there is an efficiency factor. So the whole idea was, so the data would be gathered, and the sanctions would be prepared, and score would be given, and these used to run. So what did we do as a solution, right? So the whole idea is, and by now the smart people out there should be thinking, hey, why can't they automate it? And yeah, you're right. That's what we did. So we used artificial intelligence and machine learning to replicate the analyst work. Again, there were three categories or three buckets that we produced. So 100% confidence to be false positive. What's a false positive, right? So let me give you a simple example. Osama bin Laden, assume that he applies for a loan. And what happens is any name screening or any list would automatically throw. But this Osama bin Laden happens to be a big builder in Yemen who has a fantastic, or take a more, Yemen is also a sanctioned country, wrong choice, in Saudi Arabia, or good old Saudi Arabia, or in America. Let's assume Osama is in America for simplicity of reasoning, right? So Osama is in America. And Osama is a big builder with a big business, with a business empire, and he's a good client. So while the name kind of throws up a match and the alarm bells are set, it's pretty evident to everyone that he's not the Osama bin Laden that who's supposed to be. So that's basically with 100% confidence that you can say it's a false positive. Let's take this third example, then I'll come to the second one. What's 100% true positive? A 100% true positive example is someone who actually we know is someone who is in trouble and someone who we need to be wary of. So let's take a very recent example. Let me think. Yeah, NMC Healthcare, right? Shetty, I think that the gentleman's name is Shetty, and he's a multi-billionaire in Abu Dhabi who's the healthcare is mired in trouble right now. So obviously, if he comes for a loan, definitely all banks are going to kind of not approve it, and that's a pretty easy case. So that's 100% true positive, and you need to make sure that, hey, let me kind of obviously deal with it in the right way. The 100% less than any of these 100% is the one that analyst will kind of need to go through and then understand why that score has come up, and then so the whole idea is, obviously it's pretty obvious that the time is reduced for the analyst to do his or her work. But most importantly, the cool thing about this is not the automation, it's not the reduction of time. It's about the ability of the computer to give a narrative, to tell why it came to this particular conclusion. That for me is really something special, right? So it is able to actually spec out and say, hey, I looked at this list and then I did it. So there is explainability in the steps that it had taken to arrive at the conclusion. And that's extremely important. So we'll talk about explainability, bias, etc. tomorrow, but that's something that's very, very important. So unless I understand why this decision was made, if it was an analyst, he or she would note down the steps. And that's the way this computer does. And obviously there's machine learning, which reinforces and improves the learnings from the first part, and then improves whatever the score was done earlier, and if there were some mistakes that was committed, based on how the analyst edits the feedback, it goes, and then the next cycle will be much better. A fantastic example. So you can, this solution is available in a public domain. You can go to standardcharter.com, Google Silent 8, the whole case study is there for you to see. So a good example. Right. The next example that I'll talk about is gamification, right? So gamification is something that's pretty cool, and this generation is pretty much into games. What it does is very simple but pretty cool. So I go to, say, Phoenix Mall in Chennai, and I swipe my card and spend $10,000. So automatically, instantly, I kind of get an offer that says, hey, can you swipe this? And when I swipe on the card, when I swipe on my phone on the message, it gives me an offer for, say, $100 rupees at Starbucks. So, which is also located at Phoenix Mall. So this is a simple way to kind of explain. But if you understand the logic behind it, there's a lot of science to it. First, obviously, you need to have limits to which you need to send the offer to, right? You cannot send this for all, you need to have thresholds. So you need to say that you need to have some rules. You cannot have more than 3 spends in a day. Spends have to be greater than a particular threshold, etc., etc. The second is you need to actually contextualize, understand the client. If it's a teetotaler, and if you're going to give him, and the guy who doesn't drink coffee, and if you give him a Starbucks voucher, it wouldn't be good, right? And if you can understand, if it's a lady who's made the purchase and there's a metro shoe sale going on in Phoenix Mall and you give them a ladies wear 40% coupon on top of that, that's hyper personalization. And that's what gamification is all about, right? So you validate the spend, you understand the client DNA. So the understanding part is probably the most difficult. Many of us use fancy terms like client 360, I know my clients in and out, but there are very few companies that have actually mastered the art of truly understanding their client. The last is also equally important, which is to actually give an offer at the right location, which uses geospatial technology. So it's not about just giving an offer. So if I give an offer at Pondy Bazaar for a purchase made at Velachery, I'm defeating the purpose of giving an offer. So the whole idea is, how do I make the offer relevant to the particular person at the point of sale? So again, simple technologies, but a lot of science behind it, and banks are very much into it. Right, let's move on to a HR example. How much time have we got? So we'll talk a little bit more. I'll probably talk for 10 more minutes and then we'll get into questions. It's a very provocative statement. Will there be humans in HR? And why do I say that? So, and as I talk through this, you will probably come to the conclusion yourself. And this was probably one of the industries that I thought would be the last affected, not the least affected, last affected by this whole data and analytics tsunami. But I have a friend who runs a startup in Singapore, and he says that probably this will get disrupted faster than anything else. So a resume screening tool, as the name suggests, screens resumes automatically. It uses a technology called parsing. So basically, it does a automatic match against the job description and what you've written in your resume, auto-matches it, and then assigns a score automatically. So if I'm asking for Java, Kubernetes, and if I'm going to ask Docker, I'm going to talk about Spring Boot, and you write Oracle, ProC, and you're going to submit a resume. There's no point even spending time talking to that candidate, right? So after parsing is complete, then there are chatbots, AI chatbots, etc. that further context tests to filter out before you can actually get to a level of candidates. And this is already happening. So if you think this is something that's going to happen in future, that's not true. It's already happening today. The second, and if you thought that, hey, is this just for hiring? There's something called remote proctoring, which is cheat-proof online live test. So I really like this word cheat-proof, right? So it uses your camera, and using the software, it actually senses whether you're looking straight at the camera, whether you use Alt-Tab, whether you use Control-C, it records keystrokes. Essentially, it does remote invigilation. So think about it for people who are listening in from colleges. You don't need to come to a college to give an exam. And more exams are going to, obviously, now we still write a lot of exams, but most will be moved online. But the invigilation need not happen through a center. Look at the amount of cost it's going to save, and look at the ability to kind of push digital too. And if you thought this is just all pre-onboarding, which is basically I'm screening the candidate, I'm invigilating, even post-onboarding, there are multiple tools and technologies which have come in. Basically, even in our bank, we have AI-based coaching of employees. We have chatbots, HR chatbots that we chat with, and basic queries like how many days of leave, why is this simple questions that are answered automatically. So HR is one field also that's getting disrupted. Now, retail is a field that will obviously face the brunt. Amazon Go is a fantastic example, and I think I truly like this example because I'm so able to relate to it. The millennials of this generation are so used to the fact that they want things fast. So Amazon Go, as you would all be aware, launched stores, which basically means you just tap your Amazon Pay card, enter, buy your stuff, and walk out of it, right? So sensors, you don't need to pay, you don't need to do, but just by sensors that are all over. It goes back to the example that I was speaking earlier about streaming of data, captures every moment, understands what item you've picked, and automatically debits your Amazon Pay card. Seamlessly done and very fast. Why I relate to this well is an example of my own kids, right? So whenever I want to go to restaurants, when I ask my kids, okay, let's go, the first question is not what restaurant. The first question they get into the car is, how long does it take? So this generation is all about time. So our parents thought that we were impatient and we were fast. I don't think they have seen our kids in action, and wait till they see them. Obviously, some of them have, but this generation is super fast. So yeah, so Amazon Go, using sensor technology, using and it's pretty cool. When you take an item from the shelf, it uses weights and then automatically senses what has been removed, what is the quantity removed. Brilliant piece of work. Right. So there are, like I said, if I had to, I can talk about many more examples, but I'm cognizant of the time, so I'll kind of not talk further examples. But if you look at what data can do, I kind of put it into 4 quadrants, right? I thought this was a good way to actually visualize it. Either you can optimize your business, which is primarily internal focus, like how Walmart did. Walmart uses data to look at stock and did a fantastic job of managing stock, inventory, and actually making sure that their shelves are always full. If you go to Walmart, you'll never see that anything is empty. It is always there. Then innovation, improving your business, which is primarily client focused. Disney is a great example. So those who go to Disneyland would know that you have this Disney watch, which has made the whole experience seamless, right? So what it does, again, a sensor that goes and it recognizes where you are. So the moment you land, people call you and then call you by name. You don't even need to give them, and because at the time of ordering the sensor, they kind of already know you're going to land on this particular date. The whole check-in process is smooth. They know what rides you prefer, and all this by just wearing a wristband. And kids are so free. You go to a restaurant, they also know what you like, and it is pre-ordered, and they come and address you by your surname, and it's served to you. What a fantastic experience. So yeah, Disney really moved the needle in improving the business. Changing your business, a great example is Netflix. What started off as a DVD retailer was then is now the number 1 streaming platform in the world. I still remember, I keep going back and I read the 2008 letter the CEO wrote. He said at that time Netflix had a billion usages of the DVD. They own 100,000 titles. So the CEO wrote, our core business is still going to be DVD, but we're going to experiment with streaming movies. And 2010, he said, our core business is streaming. We can see that we are going to disrupt our own business. Not many people would take that bet, and look at where Netflix is. So it's still in the business of movies, but it's all about improving their own self. It's about disrupting themselves from within. A fantastic example. So Netflix is a role model that. The last quadrant is probably the most difficult, and not many companies have succeeded. Primarily the fact that you need to really, in reinventing your business is not true, and actually there are some good case studies. One example is John Deere, the American tractor company, iconic green tractors, the red tractors are Indian ones, which are under TAFE. So the green tractors, what started off as a farming company, now is an AI company. That's how they call themselves. So from farming to AI. They do remote farming, they do something called as precision farming, and they even acquired a software company. I think it's called Blue River Systems. I think Blue River Systems. And the Blue River Systems does targeted spraying of herbicides. So they acquired a system and they set up a swanky office in San Francisco. So imagine a tractor company, a heavy machinery company, it's 150 years old, reinventing their business. So these are, why I give you all these is, any of your business transformation, again, this is in my humble opinion, can fit into one of these quadrants. And this is a good way of seeing that. Yeah, we spoke about Walmart, Netflix, John Deere, and yeah, so we've come towards the end of my presentation. So this is the second part is complete. The third part is primarily some thoughts on the technology roadmap and some of the challenges. And then we'll answer some questions. Yeah, so in-memory processing, it's a given. So if you are not doing real-time or near real-time analytics, I think you lost the game. So even before it starts. Yes, end of day is still important. But if you're not doing real-time or near real-time analytics, it's a game changer. You're already behind the 8 ball. Yeah, move workloads to cloud wherever possible. That's why I use the words where possible. I wish I didn't use that. I would love to move every workload to cloud, but we do have regulations, etc. But we should work like analytics workload. Can it be moved to cloud? But wherever possible, cloud is truly a game changer. embrace CI, CT, CD, continuous integration, continuous testing, continuous delivery. So if I had to give an analogy, this is like this sushi conveyor belt where food is kind of going in a conveyor belt, and you have these people at the end of it who want real-time data and who are waiting for real-time information. So your kitchen should also be willing to serve that in real time. So yeah, we'll talk more about security, platform governance, profiling. These are arduous tasks, but the more you automate, the more benefits you're going to get. So as much as I don't like to put this is the truth. The reality is ETL as a concept is long dead. ETL was primarily associated with data warehouses and data to start with. Extract, transform, load. That's how we used to use data. You used to extract the data, you used to transform the data, and you used to load the data. That's gone. Everything is in the form of events, microservices, APIs, and how can I get streaming data? Hadoop, and this is a bit provocative, but Hadoop is dying. Again, in my humble opinion, I was the one actually who championed Hadoop in my organization, but I kind of saw the writing fast. And primarily, I'll also tell you why. If on-prem cloud is going to be made on-prem, it is going to challenge Hadoop in a big way. Hadoop will be there for some time. That's why I use the word dying carefully. But yeah, and obviously, long-live data democratization. I didn't want to have a negative connotation. The reality is, the more the people access the data, the more beneficial it's going to be from the organization standpoint. It's not about entrusting data to executives. It's not about securing your data. You need to do the latter. Securing is important, but you should make sure as many people as possible in the organization actually use the data. Yeah, data warehouses are obsolete. Data analytics is present. And as you saw through my examples, IoT wills the future. Yeah, so IoT is not omnipresent because IoT stands for Internet of Things. So it's not omnipresent because banking is a frontier that it has not yet conquered. There are some use cases, fringe use cases, dare I say, but yeah, it is definitely in the future. Yeah, so Epilogue is, like I told you, as much as we saw all the good things, let me talk about some of the challenges and some of the thoughts, like I said, for which even I don't think I have all the answers, but these are some to leave you to ponder with. So you saw how the whole data space is transforming. So do you have the right people? Do you have the right people who can actually harness this? It's just not about being a good engineer or developer, but you also need to have the people who can tell stories, who can actually combine this data, who understand business, who can have a mix of both technology and business experience and have a good narrative to say. Access to data, I think we have spoken enough about it. Can every staff seamless access, obviously the right levels of data? This is interesting, accuracy of data. How do I strike a balance between speed and cleanliness? So I spoke about the example where I told you data needs to be instantly streamed and people need to access the data and you need to send back offers. There is also yet another spectrum of people, users of data who said, I need data to be reconciled and then only I need to be used. So how do you balance it? This space is exploding. We spoke about new technologies being one of the pillars. But how do you balance the adoption of new technologies and the ability to sunset old ones? How do you have an open architecture where they can seamlessly integrate and how you can adopt new technologies and seamlessly sunset old ones? That's something that it's more easy said than done, but that's something that everyone should take care, especially in this space. I would really think through. Yeah, the whole cloud thing, I spoke about it, regulations should support. Yeah, AI, like I told you, AI has gone through something called as AI winters. This, for those who have been in the field will know what I mean. So there have been always the promise that we've cracked AI and AI is going to be the new holy grail and that's the path to success, for unfortunately to be disappointed. But with our whole processing cost coming down, storage cost, 1 gigabyte used to cost $300,000 in 1981, $300,000, 1 gigabyte. Now it's 3 cents. So why I say that this AI requires tons of data and of course processing, but hopefully can we truly make it mass market? Right now we have some specific use cases, but can I commercialize AI at scale? A very important facet that people overlook. We do a lot of cool things, and I think I've also been guilty of this. So I'm pretty excited to get onto any new data bandwagon and deliver and do a lot of cool things. But the whole idea is, how do we monetize? How do you measure? Is it truly adding value? Is it actually beneficial? What you're doing, is it really a game changer or not? And I think everyone should do that. So you might all be thinking, this is my last slide. I've given you two important things, like I told you, takeaways, and I've not yet told my third takeaway. So data is the new oil, and this is a McKinsey study that was published very recently in 2016, right, December, just 3 years back, 2016, yeah, 3.5 years back. And I'm no big fish to take on McKinsey, but what COVID has taught me is that definitely in this time, people can live without oil. Oil futures went negative. You all saw that, right? So what I'm saying is data is not the new oil. So I'm not debunking McKinsey, but I'm saying data is oxygen. So it's just not oil. Oil gives a connotation. You still need to harness it. My take is you need data to survive. It's an existential question. So unless you use data, forget about it. You're not going to be in the game also. So this is my third takeaway. So that brings me to the end of hopefully what has been enriching session for you. It was enriching for me, but we'll go into some Q&A with that, right? Trying to open the questions. Give me a second. Wow, so many questions. Okay, how much time have you got? Brilliant, I spoke for an hour, far exceeded my time as usual, Santhosh, not sticking to time. Okay, why should we start a career in AI data science? I just picked a random one. Why should we? I mean, after all what you heard, I say if you still don't want to do a career in data and AI, I think you're at the wrong lecture. But jokes apart, I think you should, if possible, tomorrow I'm doing a session on career in data analytics and AI and what are the skills that are needed. I would encourage you to join that. If you've survived today's session, tomorrow should hopefully be less taxing. But yeah, I think, and let me give you a short answer where I may talk about that tomorrow. The next 10 or 20 years at least, right? I can't see too far ahead, but I think if there is one thing that's going to rule the world, it's data analytics and AI. And I don't mean that in any pompous way. I think with utmost humility, the number of startups in Silicon Valley, maximum number of startups which are there are AI and data related. The maximum number of investments in ventures and new companies are AI related. So yeah, it's brilliant. Which colleges have good data master stream? I think I'm not in a position, but I mean, look, every college, every good college would definitely have. I mean, but that's not a pertinent question. I mean, how to switch the career from test engineer to data? These are all career-oriented questions. So let me pass on those and try to do something which is relevant. How can AI support fight against COVID in India? Oh, brilliant. I think similar to what you saw, what Mr. Zuckerberg did. I think similar to that, you can extend that to India, or you can join Mr. Zuckerberg's bandwagon and contribute to his treasure trove, and that's going to be really beneficial. How is this data science field going to be after Corona? Corona, no Corona, data science is going to exist, my friend. Is it mandatory to get knowledge about banking for artificial intelligence? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Which domain? I mean, all these questions are more career oriented. Probably, I think I should have worked with NPTEL to do the career oriented session today, because most of these questions are all, is there demand for data scientist? All these questions. Wow. Why is R better than SAS? Yeah, so SAS is a programming language which is primarily oriented towards statistical analytics. R has more libraries, and R gives more features, and R obviously is less expensive. So yeah, so my God, how can we become a data scientist in Standard Chartered? Amazing. I mean, some of these questions I don't know if I can answer, or I don't know if I have an answer. Look, I think unfortunately, I think I'm not able to keep pace with the quantum of questions. As I scroll, there are just tons of questions. But let me say something in conclusion. Um, the field of AI is definitely data analytics. AI is something that you should seriously consider if if you want to make a career, whether you want to make a switch or whether you want to start, etc. So I tried to keep this presentation at a high level to showcase the various use cases. There are tons of use cases and how AI is driving the world, right? So I would encourage you to go through it. And most importantly, there are multiple paths. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. You could be a data engineer, you could be in governance, you could do a data startup, or you could be a data scientist. So there are multiple paths to be successful. But I think eventually every person in this world will be successful in some form, shape, or size. And I don't have any doubt on that. Whether you use data or whether you use AI, machine learning or not, every one of you will be successful. So thank you very much for your time, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you.